Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Nader Hashemi. I'm the director of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. And on behalf of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, I'd like to welcome everyone to the launch of the Emir Abd El-Kader Research Initiative, focusing on the life, legacy, impact, and relevance of the 19th century Muslim Algerian anti-colonial leader, Abd El-Kader ibn Muhyiddin al-Hassani al-Jazairi, otherwise known as the Emir Abd El-Kader. This research initiative will be an academic platform designed to explore, define, and teach the multifaceted life and legacy of the Emir Abd El-Kader and his related experiences on questions of war and peace within the context of Islam-West relations. It will delve into the historic dynamics of Islam-West relations, focusing on the varied and nuanced interactions between Islamic and Christian civilizations, and emphasizing the diversity as well as the complexity of these interactions during periods of conflict and cooperation between Islam and Christianity writ large. This initiative will draw upon the Emir Abd El-Kader's life, faith, moral example, political behavior, and religious teachings to inform interfaith relations and religious pluralism today, extending the study to the insights and models of other leaders like him to advance cultural understanding and global citizenship. More importantly, these combined efforts that we're pursuing, we hope to make them both accessible and translatable to a broader audience that will benefit not just faculty and students, but also the general public as well. This initiative will also engage critically in current affairs, strategically implementing activities in a responsible and politically relevant way to maximize the generous gift that is at the foundation of this particular initiative. I want to begin today's session by acknowledging the presence of several important people in the room today. First and foremost, John Kiser, sitting here in the front row. John Kiser will be given a formal introduction later on in the program, but he's very much the key reason why we are all gathered here today. We look forward to hearing from him fairly soon. I also want to acknowledge the presence of John Lewis Esposito, University Professor Emeritus and the founding director of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim-Christian Understanding. And also I want to acknowledge the presence here of Josef Meri, Senior Fellow at our Al-Walid Center and soon to be research professor, who will be playing a key role in advancing the intellectual project that is at the foundation of this research initiative. And finally, I'd like to also acknowledge the presence here of Dalia Fahmy, Associate Professor of Political Science at Long Island University and a member of our center's academic council. We're deeply indebted to her contributions for bringing us all together today and supporting this intellectual project. The format for today's session is going to be as follows. We're going to begin with two very short video presentations. Then there's going to be a panel discussion between myself, John Esposito, and Josef Meri. I'm going to make an announcement about the student grant prize that is available and that is a key part of this research initiative. And then I'm going to turn the floor over to John Kiser to share with us some remarks about this particular project. And we hope to end by 1:30 when we have to vacate this very wonderful and beautiful setting known as Riggs Library. So who is the Emir Abd El-Kader? Most people, including many Arabs and Muslims, have really never heard about him or know very little about him, thus posing the question, why a research initiative to honor his legacy? So I'd like to begin today's session launching this research initiative, and in mind of the fact that many people do not know the details and the significance and the relevance of this particular individual's life, by sharing with you a 6-minute video on the Emir Abd El-Kader that provides a really excellent introduction as to who this man is and why he matters for our contemporary world. Play the video, please.
Near death in Damascus, 1883, and the New York Times was already writing his obituary, calling him one of the few great men of our time. So who was he? And what made him so great? So great that in 1846, a new settlement was named El-Kader in his honor. At the time, Emir Abd El-Kader al-Jazari had made a name for himself internationally and in the United States as a patriot and a freedom fighter. His struggle to unite disparate tribes to resist French colonization was a mere 3 generations after a similar American experience with the British. For the French, Abd el-Kader represented a dangerous opponent because of his unprecedented weapon, his humanitarian instincts. This, coupled with religious guidance, caused him to treat French prisoners no differently than his own men when it came to food, medical attention, and respectful behavior. Such information, the French High Command did everything possible to keep suppressed. More than 20 years later, those same humanitarian instincts caused him to save thousands of Christian lives in Damascus during the Druze riots of 1860. This won him the admiration of leaders around the world, including President Abraham Lincoln, Queen Victoria, Pope Pius IX. Even his former enemy, France, awarded him the Legion of Honor, their highest recognition of valor. His behavior also won the admiration of Muslim leaders, including Imam Shamil, the famed freedom fighter of the Caucasus, and the Ottoman Sultan, Abdul-Majid I. Today, his bust holds an honored place in the foyer of the International Red Cross in Geneva, alongside that of founder Henri Dunant, a Swiss businessman and a European advocate of humane treatment of prisoners. Dunant had his own humanitarian instincts reinforced visiting Algiers when he learned of the uncommonly high standards that the emir held his men to, standards derived from a strict application of Islamic law. So who was he, this Abd el-Kader? He was a scholar, a warrior, a mystic, poet, diplomat, whose faith was drawn from the 11th century Sufi tradition, that of Abd el-Kader al-Jilani. To relate to Abd el-Kader, Americans might think of John Winthrop, the founder and governor of the Massachusetts Bay Company, who ruled by the good book. To Algerians, they have considered Abd el-Kader as their George Washington since 1962, when they won their independence from France. For Americans, Abd el-Kader represents a story and a faith model that is badly needed today, badly needed to rebalance perceptions of Islam, a religion with over 1.7 billion adherents. And for Muslims, the emir represents a much-needed source of pride and connection to the best in their own tradition. And that is one of the reasons I wrote a book about his life and times. For Abd el-Kader, his religion was not a safety belt holding his identity together, but a platform for exploring the meaning of God's universe. His theology was simple. God is greater than whatever we think God is. No one owns God. So how do Muslims today react to Abd el-Kader's Islam? Mohammed Khan Nasser, publisher of Al-Sharia Journal in Pakistan, a scholar with conservative roots, had this to say about Abd el-Kader. Abd el-Kader is not only a symbol of the Muslim concept of resistance and struggle against foreign domination, but also an embodiment of true theological, moral, and rational ideas taught by Islam. First, he is not overwhelmed by blind zeal to fight at all costs. Rather, he's capable of weighing the pros and cons and making wise decisions. Secondly, he is strictly guided in his decisions by the legal limitations and moral obligations set forth in the divine law. Thirdly, his political animosity with the French doesn't blind him to what they have in common. And finally, he can put himself in his adversary's shoes. Imagine that. He can look into the complexities of the situation and understand the different factors that compel them to follow a certain course. Abd el-Kader's lived faith inspired people of all traditions, like Cardinal Léon Etienne Duval, the champion of Algerian independence. On his deathbed in 1996, Duval predicted that Algeria would one day surprise the world. I think it is possible that this is actually unfolding today, as Algerians resolutely and peacefully pursue a change of government that rejects the horrors of the 1990s. Both Deval and the Emir would have agreed wholeheartedly with the Apostle Peter, who advised that faith alone is not enough. To faith, one must add virtue. To virtue, add knowledge. To knowledge, perseverance. To perseverance, self-control. And to self-control, godliness and brotherly love. Abd el-Kader, above all, placed importance on knowledge, but not merely knowledge of things, which he considered like rainwater, but a deeper knowledge of God's ways to enable us to live together in harmony. It is called the Golden Rule. It's also called love thy neighbor. I'm John Kiser for the Emir Stein Center.
And by the way, that video is on YouTube if you want to see it again.
This video.
So when we were preparing for this event, it just so happened, literally 1 week ago, we accidentally discovered a man by the name of Saad Khalidi. He's a retired teacher, school teacher in London, England, who just so happens to be the great-great-grandson of the Emir Abd El-Kader. We corresponded with him. We learned about him. He is related to the Emir Abd El-Kader through his maternal grandmother, who is Algerian. And he is now of mixed Palestinian and Jewish heritage. He's also very proud of his genealogy, especially his family connection to the Emir Abd El-Kader. When he heard that we were gathering here today to honor his legacy, to launch this research initiative, he sent us a short video message, which we'd like to play right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm speaking from London. My name is Saad. I am part of the Khalidi family, and my grandmother was Algerian and was actually the granddaughter of Emir Abd El-Kader. So that's on my father's side. Hazem al-Khalidi's mother, Munira, was born Al-Jilani, the daughter of the Crown Prince, the son of Emir Abd El-Kader. On the other side of my family, I'm not only Palestinian and Algerian, but I'm also Syrian and Jewish. My other grandmother, Mathilde, was the daughter of the Belgian consul in Casablanca. She met my Syrian grandfather in 1919. They decided to get married. They moved to Manchester. He developed major cotton interests and eventually even became the Syrian consul for this country. So I have a very diverse background, but I'm happy to learn that Georgetown University is pursuing a research initiative into the legacy of Emir Abd El-Kader. And about a year or two ago, I did a podcast, a lecture about the Emir. So what was special about the Emir? Well, he was deeply religious. He'd gone on a pilgrimage to the Middle East as a very young man. He was inspired by hikmah. We are told in the Quran of Luqman, who sought wisdom, and he sought wisdom. And he was particularly interested in Sufism, and he admired greatly the Sufi philosopher Ibn Arabi. And even when he died in Syria, he asked to be buried by the side of Ibn Arabi. He had tremendous political values, and they have, I think, passed down through the generations. You may not know, but my father was the Palestinian leader who unfortunately had to surrender the the city of Jerusalem in 1967. He went on informally to lead the entire Palestinian community for 13 years until his death. So he was inspired by many of those values, but he was not anti-Semitic, which I don't think will surprise you, in the sense that I have that other strand in my background. I went on to study philosophy myself, and about 20 years ago, I was made a fellow of the Imperial War Museum. And I am a fellow not only of the War Museum, but also of Yad Vashem in Israel. I'm the only Palestinian Holocaust fellow. I have studied Palestinian history and Jewish history, and I'm fairly expert in the history of the Holocaust. And of course, members of my grandmother's family died in the Holocaust. So on the Palestinian side, I have a very deep understanding, as I do have on the Jewish side. But I would particularly wish to thank John Kiser, and I was inspired by his book, and that he is developing this research initiative that is funded by William and Mary Grieve and through their foundation. Just as equally, I have been sponsored by the president of the Guggenheim, Wendy Fisher, through her Kirsch Foundation, and who sponsors Lockdown University, and I do broadcasts for Lockdown University. But I wish you well in your initiative, and if there are any queries, I'm always available to answer them. So good luck and good fortune and good studying. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have a panel discussion here for maybe about half an hour and then move on in the program. And I want to begin with John Esposito, because John is the founding director of the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. And as an initial question, John, I wonder if you could share with this audience and those who are watching online how your vision of this center really overlaps with the life and legacy of the Emir Abd El-Kader. Could you draw that connection?
Just a couple of opening comments. One needs to understand that when I, for example, did my doctorate, my background is in a monastery for 10 years, married for 60, much better than the first 10. And I was a young Catholic theologian, and it was suggested that I take a course in Islam. I said, no thanks. I saw no reason to take it. In terms of the American situation, Muslims were certainly in America, but people were known by their national background. There was no anti-Muslim racism or Islamophobia, as it were, existing. And there was no interest in Islam. The Iranian Revolution was when Americans and many Westerners had their experience, and their experience was people shouting death to America. And it didn't matter whether or not I went in right after the revolution and came back and basically said most people in Iran are not shouting death to America every day, etc. But that was the image. And what happened is that a number of years later, you had the first Gulf War, and then you had the Russians being pushed out of Afghanistan, and the concern of a group of Arab businessmen led by an Arab Christian. In the old days, we would even qualify it more and say an Arab Catholic. But we're letting Christians of all background into heaven. And I have some inside knowledge about that, so I can talk to you about others who may get in. But the reality of it was that there was no real, for them, what they were concerned about is that with the end of the Cold War, Islam might be seen as the next global threat. Okay? And I remember meeting with a very senior member of the administration, and the first thing that he said to me when there were problems in Algeria was, is this another Iran? And so then I said something like, I hope you're not thinking that you're equating the two and that there's going to be oh, well, I'm not thinking of that. But 10 minutes later, he said, well, you know, the only global threat that I can see on the horizon is Islam. So in 1993, these Arab, Christian, and Muslim businessmen wanted to create a center. They had created their own institution outside, but they created a center here, and they funded the creation of the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding in Georgetown School of Foreign Service. The reality as things then developed was that we had a 9/11. And I remember at 9/11, the chair of our committee, who was a distinguished Palestinian professor who was teaching at Harvard, basically said this will set us back 30 years. And I thought, how naive. That's what older people are like. They panic. No more than 10 years. And here we are, and things are worse than they were back then. But in terms of the vision of the people in 1993, it was actually foreseeing this concern in that context, but the relevance of the center became even greater over the years. The extent to which there was no interest was that when I first got my degree, there were no book contracts. Nobody would answer, and if you did get an answer, it would be, nice idea, but there's no market. Okay. The opposite then happened for many years and after 9/11, but that opposite has been the growth, significant growth of Islamophobia. And that's why we set up something called the Bridge Initiative, Protecting Pluralism, Ending Islamophobia, about 10 years ago, which has about 1 million followers. You can go to our website. The relevance here, though, when it comes to the Emir, is that I never heard about the Emir in all of my study. I never heard about the Emir in my reading. Now, admittedly, I was reading certain areas and not other areas. And if I did come across the name, it probably would have been a single sentence or a paragraph. And, you know, and Algeria was never really, for America, on our radar, the way, for example, France, you know, it would be. And so when I then actually began to read about the Emir, it was phenomenal to me to see what happened. But the importance in terms of where we are today is that someone like John Kiser actually had that discovery and has pursued it for so much of his life, which is phenomenal. Because, you know, he had his own professional background, etc., but he then, in a personal way, had experiences in Algeria, and he can, you know, talk about that, how those experiences got him to be, okay, interested, so then you stay and you look into it. Maybe you write a little something, but to be this involved for so many decades. And the reason why the Emir is a fit with what the center does is that, first of all, the Emir counters all the stereotypes. I mean, you have somebody who, yes, was a warrior, but fought in, as it were, legitimate wars. He also was a Sufi mystic, and he was very much an intellectual and a humanitarian. So you had someone who could fight when he needed to fight, but who, if you look at how he treated prisoners, it was remarkable. He saved thousands of lives that in terms of the what happened in Syria between, you know, with the Druze, etc., you know, and he saved, I mean, the idea that a Muslim leader would save those lives, and the treatment, and that's where the video is good. It's a short video, but it gives you an idea that we're talking about saving lives in a very direct way, providing food, providing medicine, being concerned. He very much espoused, you know, if you will, a legitimate understanding of war and peace and human rights. All of this is just a remarkable story. And so when I met with John and we began to talk about this project, this just seemed like a very good fit.
Great. Josef, could you talk about some of the key moments in the Emir's life that really stand out? We saw a bit of it in the video, and the two that stand out I'd like you to give us some background details on was how, in the context of the French colonization of Algeria, the Emir Abd El-Kader's humane treatment of French captured prisoners shocked the French government, French ruling elites, the French military. So that's one topic. And then the other one I want you to give the audience some background is what happened in 1860. So start with the first one.
Yeah, thank you for that. I do appreciate this cue here. In terms of the first event, as you heard from the video, of course, Emir Abd El-Kader had treated his prisoners humanely, unlike the French troops. And the French army, of course, decimated the Algerian countryside, engaged in a policy of destroying villages, engaged in acts of rape and murder and enslavement of Algerian women as well. So we find that Abd El-Kader is a counterbalance to this. He's not just a counterbalance. He effectively, amidst all of this chaos, amidst the murder and the rape and the various horrific acts that were perpetrated by the French army, with the blessing of their generals, of course. The generals had decided to turn the other way when their troops engaged in this sort of behavior. Emir Abd El-Kader, of course, ordered his men not to decapitate prisoners, which was a common practice in Algeria during the 19th century. In fact, he outlawed this practice. Unfortunately, the French carried on this practice and engaged in torture, which both practices, of course, are outlawed in Islam. So to treat one's prisoner humanely, this emerges from the Qadri values, such as the virtues of truth and protection and restraint that he exhibited. From Abd el-Qadir al-Jilani, the mystic who died in 1166. So among these values, these Sufi but also Islamic values that he espoused, he put into practice. He didn't just preach these values, he put them into practice. This is an important point here.
And then the 1860, could you talk about what happened in 1860 in Damascus?
Yeah, absolutely. The massacre that today we regard the massacre of Christians in 1860 as a turning point in the history of Muslim-Christian relations in Syria. In 1860, of course, in Mount Lebanon, the Druze and the Christians, the Maronite Christians, were subjugated. They were vassals, essentially, and the Druze and the Muslims were the landowners. But of course, the tension flared up there, and there were battles, and Christians were being killed. And the battle, of course, this chaos spread to Damascus. So in 1860, Emir Abd El-Kader had been in Damascus since 1855. So what had happened at this point is that he already had a sense that something was going to occur. And he actually did warn the consuls, he warned other officials, the Ottoman Sultan as well at this point, Abdul-Majid I, that something, his governor, of course, Ahmed Pasha, and he had warned them that something was going to happen. But indeed it did. A conflagration broke out. The incident that one doesn't really know the exact circumstances of was that schoolboys had decided to desecrate the cross. They either scribbled or drew the cross on a wall or on the ground. They spat on it. And of course the governor overreacted. A governor took this group of schoolboys, these are schoolboys, mind you, and he decided to make an example of them. He took them to the Christian quarter and ordered that they clean the Christian quarter. Of course, one of the boys' fathers, who was an irregular in the army, decided this is not going to happen, and he instigated an insurrection, basically. And so the Druze actually joined him at this point, and other Muslim, I would say riffraffs, decided that they would join in on this action to try to seek revenge for what had transpired. So in the end, of course, what had happened was that a couple of thousand Christians had lost their lives initially. And Emir Abd El-Kader took action. Emir Abd El-Kader decided that he was going to raise the French flag over his place of residence in Damascus, which is near to the Christian quarter, Harat al-Nasara in Arabic. But there were actually 3 Christian quarters involved, not a single quarter, but 3 Christian quarters. And so he ended up in the end, it wasn't just Emir Abd El-Kader, but it was also the notables of Damascus who joined him in this effort. And we often think that it was a one-man show. It was not a one-man show. It was in fact Emir Abd El-Kader who was leading this initiative.
And is this how Abraham Lincoln, Queen Victoria, and the Pope hear about this man, Emir Abd El-Kader, because of what happened in Damascus?
Absolutely. Through diplomatic channels, they had heard that this is Emir Abd El-Kader who had actually saved the lives of up to 15,000 Christians.
Okay. And so the other question that I'd like you to speak on, Yusuf, is the roots of the Emir's Islamic ethics.
Yeah.
In other words, what were his religious influences that shaped his Islamic humanism?
Thank you for that question. Great question. As you heard from the most excellent video that John Kiser presented, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, the Andalusian mystic, of course, the whole notion of wahdat al-wujud, the unity of being, was
what time period are we talking about? Because people don't know.
We're talking about the 12th century, essentially, in the case of, and also in the case of Abd al-Qadir Jilani, whose namesake, he was named after him, and of course Abd al-Qadir Jilani, this is the Sufi tariqah or Sufi path that he follows of the Gilaniya Sufis, right? So the Qadiri order, existed from North Africa all the way to Iraq and Iran as well. So the Qadiris, he belonged to the Qadiri Sufi, but his spiritual master, if you will, was Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, right, who authored the Meccan Revelations, Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the famous work of Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. And also his father was named, Emir Abd el-Qadir's father was named Muhyiddin, and Emir Abd el-Kader, he was named after the saint and theologian Abd al-Qadir Jilani. So it's interesting to note this fact. So the values that he espoused was, of course, understand, the virtues of truth, as I mentioned earlier, protecting people in need and populations in need, generosity. He showed great restraint when it came to dealing with the enemy. For instance, he engaged in a constant struggle, right? Ijtihad, in the internal struggle. It's not just the outward struggle, but it is also the internal struggle. And finally, in terms of his world view, he united, as John Kiser indicated, the role. He was a scholar, he was a mystic, he was a warrior, all of these in one. He didn't have an on the road to Damascus experience where all of a sudden, as he was locked away in French prisons for 5 years, all of a sudden he became a reformed Muslim in the modern parlance. It was not that way at all. In fact, all along his upbringing, his upbringing in the Zawiya, right? The Zawiya, being a Sufi lodge where he was educated, where he was inculcated with the values of Islam, the values of restraint, knowledge of the Quranic sciences, of riding a horse, learning adab, etiquette, learning the proper etiquette. So this was all part of the world view of Emir Abd el-Kader. And this actually contributed to his emerging as a spiritual leader, as the leader of the Qadiri order in Algeria and in Syria as well. And that's what I wanted to say in brief. Yeah, so thank you.
Let me turn back to John and ask him the following question. So the Emir Abd el-Kader, in my reading of him, is an embodiment of Jesuit values. Do you agree? And if you could share with this audience, what are Jesuit values, and to what extent does the Emir embody those values? What would be the points of commonality and difference?
To begin by saying that my two brothers were educated by Jesuits completely. I was not. I'm Franciscan. I was in a Franciscan order. I said that at a fundraiser in Boston for the university.
How'd that go?
I was never invited back after that. It's amazing. I thought it was pretty, and they weren't happy about it. No, I think that, one of the things that is amazing about the Jesuit order, but particularly because, from my point of view, because of Pedro Arrupe, who had been the leader of the Jesuits, is a formal sense of being concerned about men and women for others, and a real emphasis on that. And it can be seen, I think, if one looks at whether it's the liturgy that occurs here, whether it's the chaplain's office, but also, I would argue, if you are associated with Georgetown, regardless of what faith you have or what faith you don't have, Georgetown has a set of values that, for me, mesh very well with what the Emir was talking about. Because if you are concerned, if you're men and women for others, and you're concerned about all the others, so when I first came, for example, one of the Jesuits asked to have lunch with me, and one of the first things he said to me was, we're thinking about having a Muslim chaplain. And, could I help in fundraising? And at the time, I said, okay, and what would the job description look like? He said, well, they would be part-time. And I said, well, we have a lot of full-time Catholic chaplains, Protestant. I said, if you're going to think about a Muslim chaplain with significance, it should be full-time. And Georgetown wound up hiring the first full-time chaplain in the United States at that time.
Okay. And so, one last question to Josef. One of the fascinating things about the Emir's legacy is his contribution to international law, particularly international humanitarian law, the rules of war. And he's considered to be, by many people, as someone who prefigured the development of the Geneva Conventions. So when you go to Geneva, and if you go to the headquarters of the International Committee of the Red Cross, as we sort of saw in the video, you'll see a bust of the Emir Abd El-Kader. Could you say more about that relationship in terms of his prefiguring the development of the Geneva Conventions and international humanitarian law?
Thank you. That's actually a fascinating question, because we often don't think about it. 1863, the Geneva Convention was instituted. And Dena, who was the head of the ICRC, had actually, as the video mentioned, had gone to Algeria, where he learned about the legacy. In fact, what became apparent in terms of, first of all, the donation was in 2013 of a figure or a statue of Dena, as well as Emir Abd El-Kader, and they were donated by the government of Algeria. Which is interesting. The ICRC, of course, realized, and as did Dana, the importance of Emir Abd El-Kader and his legacy to preserving the lives of prisoners, to, of course, allowing ministers. What wasn't mentioned in the video is, of course, allowing Catholic priests to minister to prisoners. This is an important point here, because he allowed also freedom of religion. He outlawed women and children, French women and children, or European women and children being held captive. He ordered his men to not take women and children captive. He obviously ordered doctors to treat the ill, the prisoners, as well as to feed them. He fed them of his food, as the video pointed out as well. So all of this goes to show that these ideas existed, not just among Emir Abd El-Kader. Emir Abd El-Kader is one exemplar of these values. Others, like Saladin, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, the Ayyubid leader, espoused similar values. And you could find other figures throughout history. But in the modern period, Emir Abd El-Kader certainly is not only does not only represent a continuation rather of this legacy of hospitality and treating prisoners well, but also he was very much an exemplar who actually showed the West what he was about, what he showed the French and the Europeans, and when he what he even suggested to the bishop that we should not just release only one prisoner, demand that all of the prisoners, we will demand that all of the prisoners, that there will be a prisoner exchange, right? The French did not live up to the end of the bargain. The Algerians did. They released French prisoners of war. So, in a nutshell.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So last question to John, and then I want Yusuf to weigh in on this, and then we'll move on in the program. So one of the things we're hoping to do with this research initiative is to get Josef Meri to write a new monograph, intellectual biography, and book on the Emir Abd El-Kader and his legacy. So John, given what we know about the Emir Abd El-Kader and the work of our center, what themes stand out in your mind as important themes that this new book should focus on? Also in light of where we are today in the world, rising authoritarianism, Islamophobia, polarization, genocide in Gaza, etc. What would you say are the most important themes that would make a book really a unique contribution and add to the general knowledge, not just on the Emir Abd El-Kader, but on the broad theme of Islam-West relations?
Well, I think that where it becomes, particularly important is this isn't just a kind of intellectual question. It's a question that's being asked at a time at which Islamophobia is rampant globally. Okay, and most people aren't even aware of that.
Try my. Switch it. Yeah. It's on.
Is this Homeland Security?
I have no idea.
I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised.
In any case, I think that it's really important to keep that in mind, that we are, in a situation where issues of human rights, religious freedom, migration, how we treat the other, all of these are like among the most basic rights that people have, and rights that certainly for those of us who are a bit older, we were convinced that that's where we were different from the rest of the world and where America was going. And yet, if you were somebody who was 10, 15, 18, etc., the kind of situation that you grew up in would be a situation in which it's not unheard of to hear that thousands of people are going to be sent out, that we make a list of so many countries where we won't accept anybody from those countries, etc. When you look at the example of the Emir, he first of all, he was informed by his faith in a way in which one could say, look, this is kind of like the ideal Muslim example. Okay, you've got a man who's deeply spiritual. Okay, not only spiritual in the sense of doctrine and dogma, but in terms of meditation and mysticism, etc. You've got somebody who is deeply concerned about the other and their rights, but you've also got somebody who knows at times that warfare may be necessary, but that warfare should be, in the best sense of the term, defensive rather than offensive, and to a degree that you would never believe. For example, what I just said now, just get up on the internet and go and look up words that have to do with Islam and Muslims and freedom, etc. And you will see that we are inundated in our media, in our social media, with facts that just absolutely don't exist. We're living in a world in which freedom of thought and press means you can say anything. Even if you're threatening, as it were, the security, the safety, and the lives of people. And again, put your TV on and look at the actions of ICE. Look at the actions that are made by many of our people who are in the administration or in Congress. How do they talk about the other? The fact that we can actually not just have somebody say that a foreign group is killing and eating animals, but say it over and over again, and that person gets elected to be vice president of the United States. So again, you go back to the Emir within a Muslim context, And I think that's why his example needs to be out there, because when it's convenient, what people will do when they want to bash Muslims is point to a bin Laden. You know, I mean, it's that kind of situation. And I would just note, I mean, just to get autobiographical about this, and I'm being autobiographical for a reason, I can say that when I finished my degree, there were no jobs. I can also say that after the Iranian Revolution and after 9/11, I had death threats regularly. So, I mean, and you know, and I'm not a Muslim, although people who don't like what I say that I actually am. And one of these days I'll come out of the closet. So I'm not sure where the closet is right now, but I hope it's a really big place. I like space. Yeah. But I mean, this is, I really want to emphasize this. It's you know, I normally don't get this emotional about this kind of topic, but we're talking about tens of thousands of people who are being killed indiscriminately or may be killed indiscriminately, and certainly who are being arrested, imprisoned, etc. And so there isn't a sense of safety and security. I remember a few years ago, it's gotten worse now, there was a woman that I dealt with who was Muslim, raised in the Midwest, worked for the US government. She finally quit. This was after 9/11. She quit because 3 times she went overseas, came back into the country with her 12-year-old, and he would get separated from her for an hour or two while they would question both of them. So you can imagine now what the situation is like.
Last comment to you, Yusuf, about the book project. What themes stand out to you that are sort of have been understudied in terms of the legacy of the Emir that, you know, you would want to write about?
I think pretty much John Esposito has covered the themes, but I would certainly add...
Brilliant comment. Did you say that again?
Okay, my dear friend John Esposito has covered all of the themes, except that I would add, instead of adding a topic, I would like for the audience to consider, what can we do either individually or collectively to promote his legacy, whether in the university or in the public space? So I issue that challenge, pretty much a challenge to all of you and to listeners on the internet as well. So I'll leave it at that.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking John Esposito and Josef Meri. You guys can sit down. And now it gives me great pleasure to make an announcement that pertains specifically to students here at Georgetown University. In honor of the legacy of the Emir Abd El-Kader, we're pleased to announce that we are accepting submissions from Georgetown undergraduate and graduate students for 10 grant prizes worth $3,000 each per recipient. Grants will be awarded to student projects in the following broad areas: faculty-directed studies exploring the life, legacy, and impact of the Emir Abd El-Kader on our contemporary world; the Islamic humanism, political thought, and religious ethics of the Emir Abd El-Kader; our collapsing global order and its implications for the future of ethno-religious conflict; historical interactions between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity during periods of conflict and cooperation, which illustrate the diversity and the complexity of that engagement; the future of the Geneva Conventions in the aftermath of Gaza, especially the 3rd and 4th Geneva Conventions protecting civilians and non-combatants during war; international humanitarian law and artificial intelligence in the context of war today; Muslim, Christian, and Jewish interfaith relations in the world, specifically in the aftermath of Gaza; Islamophobia and anti-Semitism; the life and legacy of Pope Francis, his outreach to global Muslim communities, and advancing Muslim-Christian understanding. And finally, we're open to any other broad topic that's related to the themes that embody the life and legacy of the Emir Abd El-Kader: diplomacy, international law, interfaith relations, religious pluralism, human rights, minority rights, Islamic reform, comparative religious ethics, and more broadly, Middle East and Islamic studies. Again, I want to emphasize these prizes are worth $3,000 each. The prize is open to Georgetown undergraduate and graduate students at both of our campuses here in DC and in Doha. We're looking for proposals that are roughly under 1,000 words, and they'll be evaluated based on the quality of the proposal, the originality of the topic, clarity of expression, etc. And the deadline is February the 27th, 2026. Students can self-nominate or share a letter of nomination from a faculty member, and you can send that to our center's email address. And what I've just shared with you is available on our website. If you want more information, I also want to encourage students to reach out to us at the center. We're happy to consult with students, mentor students, guide students as they're thinking through a potential proposal or research topic. We're happy to guide students as they think about a possible application. And we also anticipate that next year we're going to make another announcement for the same amount of grant prizes for students. So this will be 2 consecutive years. And so with that as an introduction about and a description of our grant prize, I want to transition now to introduce to all of you John Kiser. It gives me great pleasure to formally introduce John Kiser this afternoon. John Kiser is an author, a philanthropist, and an entrepreneur. He serves on the board of the William and Mary Grieve Foundation, from which that position has been spearheading for over 25 years, themes and projects and initiatives that addresses America's dangerous ignorance and unfamiliarity with the Muslim faith. John has authored 5 books, most recently Commander of the Faithful, The Life and Legacy of the Emir Abd El-Kader. Commander of the Faithful ultimately spawned the Abd El-Kader Education Project, a growing worldwide movement that started in Al-Qaeda, Iowa. The goal of the project is to restore the historical memory of this remarkable man whose message is really timeless and relevant. In our current political climate, it is more important than ever to build educational awareness and to counter narratives, to balance the almost exclusively negative image of Muslims presented to the media, especially in the West. Using the life of the Emir Abd El-Kader as a vehicle, this educational project promotes cultural literacy, civility, respectful engagement in an increasingly polarized and acrimonious religious climate. The Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding in Georgetown are deeply honored to be part of the Abd El-Kader Educational Initiative. And as you've heard today, in many ways, Georgetown is really a perfect fit and home for this type of intellectual collaboration. John Kiser, your vision, your moral commitment, and your philanthropy really has single-handedly revived global interest in the life legacy of this remarkable, extraordinary, inspiring, and outstanding Muslim Algerian leader from the 19th century. We want to thank you for your courage, for your commitment and your scholarship. It's not an exaggeration to say, John, that you have literally rescued from the obscurity of our history books this figure who is very relevant to our contemporary world, and who has a lot to teach us in terms of the challenges that we're facing as a global community. So your generosity and your vision, for your generosity and your vision and your ecumenism and your solidarity and humanism, we offer you a sincere thanks. We hope we can live up to the expectations that you have of the gift that you have given us. I realize that your engagement with Abd El-Kader is something that a lot of people don't know. It has a relationship with Algerian monks. So I'd like to turn the floor over to you for the next 15 minutes to talk about your relationship with the Emir Abd El-Kader, your vision for this gift, and anything else you would like to share with this audience. The floor is yours.
I hate open-ended questions. So I think maybe the best way to describe what I've been about is to talk about the past as at least as much as and maybe more than the present. But the present's important because the present is important to you all too. But the Abd El-Kader story, which I guess maybe a few of you have read, I was very grateful to your approval of the book is something that'll stimulate other people to think and talk. But it actually was the last stage of I guess you could call it I wouldn't call it a spiritual progress, but it was a occupation that had to do with probing into things, subjects that people in my world normally didn't get interested in. In my world at the time, where I started on a different track, in which in the early years of my life, I did in fact have a small business in DC in which we did one that was at the time very unusual, which was to set up a small tech company to go into Russia and help them sell their technology to us in the US. That was sort of a no-no, but it happened and it was actually quite successful. But in the sort of late 1980s, I got bored with that, and I felt that other people in my organization were better at dealing with these folks who were interested in the products that we were introducing. And one of the things that I wanted to do was go abroad, because I do believe that one of the things that we all should be like a little bit is like the Emir, or like the Emir's father, who insisted that if you're going to be effective in dealing with the world, you ought to be exposed to as much of it as possible and interact and find out that actually most people out there are decent if you treat them decently. And so I guess I could say I had a sort of an urge to get beyond the Hamptons, get beyond New York City and Washington, and see more of the world. Well, strangely enough, one of the places that I convinced my family to join me in was to go to this dangerous place called France, but they'd never been there before, my kids. They hated the idea, but in any event, it was in France that my 10 and 11-year-old daughter and son got exposed to French culture, although they didn't speak French. They spent their time in talking English, but they got to get a sense of the flavor of, in this case, the south of France. And after 9 months, I realized that they were getting restless and wanted to come back home, and that happened. And then shortly after our departure, I read an article about the murder of 7, or was it 8 Trappist monks, and had never been to Algeria before, nor had I known a whole lot about monks. But it struck me as, since I was at a stage in my life where I really didn't want to sit at a desk all day, I diversified my life earlier, doing other things. So I made arrangements to visit with the Algerian ambassador, and then ultimately went to Algiers and talked to more people about the monks and getting to understand the reaction of the Algerians, the vast majority of them, and it's something that was a total anomaly in Algeria. Even though the outside world thinks of Algeria as just a bunch of more bad guys because they were Muslim, and they must have killed the monks, which in fact they did. But what was rarely approved or made public was the fact that 95% of the population of Algiers was horrified and ashamed by what had been done in the name of Algeria, in the name of God. So I, looking for something to do that would be more exciting than going back to New York or Long Island, I
started studying a little bit more on French in particular. But I made an overture to the Algerians to ask about, this whole scandal that lasted for quite a while, particularly in Europe, and came to the conclusion that the press itself, by its obsession with the ugly, never seemed to let up on this event, which was carried out in the name of by Muslims, by the terrorists who made hay out of that, but ultimately it didn't serve the purpose of liberating Algeria from the monks or anything like that. So I thought I'd go over there, find out who these monks were and why, different explanations of why they might have been killed. And basically, they were killed because they were kidnapped. There were 8 of them. 7 of them were kidnapped. 1 got away. 1 was had his head cut off and was hanging from a tree not far from the monastery. All pretty nasty. But as I say, the Algerians themselves were horrified and were ashamed that this was done in the name of Islam. And this is a time when Islam wasn't exactly popular anyway, and became less popular because only remembered about the killing of the monks. So it was really the monks which became that investment of, I guess it was about 5 or 6 years, where I went over there and would spend a couple of weeks at a time and talk to people about well, actually, I'd gone there twice. Once when the monks were still alive, and then I went back when they were dead. So I saw things from different angles. And in any event, I was very moved by all the things that I learned about the monks, and I wrote a book about that experience. Who's got the copy? Anybody who's got the copy of the book? Nobody? Okay. Okay. Hold it up.
No, I don't have it with me.
Okay, that's all right, as long as we know who has it. Because the book is what gave rise to my interest in the Emir and my interest in connecting those 2 events. The event of the Emir and what he became, and the Emir, and the event of the killing of the monks and the reaction of the world to that event. And so I think that what I draw from these experiences, in which there's an intimate connection, that I think our understanding of the world, take almost any subject you want, is horribly distorted by the fact that we live in a world in which you make the most money and can do, in a sense, the most damage by being negative and ugly, and forgetting about the millions of people who do good, decent things and ought to be sung hallelujahs, because we don't make money that way, at least not the press. Not the money-making press. And I think we do great harm to ourselves, to our children, to our friends, to people from abroad, by this sickening preoccupation with what's ugly and bad in life. But boy, if you can get people to buy newspapers, you must be doing something right. Well, no, it's not right. But in any event, sadly, that's what seems to drive our culture, and I suppose the culture of other countries. It would be interesting to do a comparison of how do the Vietnamese, how do the Brits, how do the people in South America, Africa, different parts of the country in the world where bad stuff presumably happens, but how much of it, and proportionate to what we spend the money we spend to get people to drop those quarters, or now 50-cent pieces, in the box. And I think that's a very dangerous way to live, and it leads to exactly what John Esposito said too, which is, when they were doing good stuff, nobody was writing about it. Why? Well, not too interesting. You can't make money. So that's kind of my message for the day, and I urge those of you who are parents or hope to become parents to expose your family, your children, your friends to bits and pieces of the world that they might not normally know anything about. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess I should stand, wait for some Trump throw some dirt balls at me.
No, well, you know what?
Well, let's find out.
Yeah, we have a little bit of time. Let me just check the clock. We have a little bit of time for questions. So if anyone has any questions, we have a microphone circulating. We'll take a few questions and then we'll wrap it up.
So everybody's in agreement with what I said?
They are. We don't see any hands. Everyone agrees.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so just by way of conclusion, I want to thank everyone for coming. Look forward to receiving the student proposals for the grant prizes. You can find out more about our center and forthcoming programs on our website. Next week, we're doing an important event on the very horrific situation in Iran, the protests and the massacres that have taken place. Please stay in touch. You can get on our mailing list. Hope to see you at our next event. Thanks again for coming.